The police unions were out in full force last week at the Texas Capitol to protect bad cops. House Bill 4286 would help prevent the Gypsy cop problem in Texas. That's where a bad cop simply goes somewhere else in the state to keep working as a police officer. Each county district attorney maintains a Brady list, which is a list of officers who are not credible to testify in court. Basically, cops who have been documented lying. If you're on a Brady list, oftentimes you can go to another county to work as a Blue Lion cop. House Bill 4286 would require a dishonorable discharge for officers on the Brady list. It would also strip dishonorably discharged officers of their pensions, although they would receive a refund of their contributions, including interest. Yet another problem is bad cops being allowed to resign to avoid a dishonorable discharge, which we frequently see with bad cops that we cover on YouTube. Personnel files for officers are often unkept, redacted, or tampered with, eliminating the paper trail of a bad cop's misconduct. House Bill 4286 aims to promote better record keeping. Will the government masters protect the people or protect the cops? Leave a like and a comment.
Okay, thank you for coming. Will you state your name, your position on the bill, and who you represent?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me. My name is Kyle Miller. I'm the Hemp Hill County Attorney, and I am for the passage of this bill.
Okay, thank you.
If you don't mind, Representative Tinderholt, I'd like to possibly address a couple of concerns that you had with the Brady list. You seem to be concerned, as you should be, about the so-called rogue prosecutor who might, with no justification, place an officer on the Brady list. I would direct you to a situation in Rockport, Texas, here a few years ago, where the DA and the police department got crossways, I think is probably the polite way to put it, and the DA refused to take any cases from the police department. She no longer has her job. She is unelected. In the same manner that any of us would be held accountable if we filed a false report with the police department or filed some sort of false document, a DA or a county attorney could be subject to the same thing. So there are some protections there in place. And again, I've had to place officers, unfortunately, on this death list, on the Brady list.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead. The chair recognizes Representative Tinderholt.
Who recommends someone for the Brady list? Does their leadership, does the police department's leadership team, do they ever recommend someone to be on a Brady list?
My experience is fairly limited on that, sir. I've not come across that situation myself. In my situation, it was between the district attorney and myself. We recognized that we had officers that had developed a pattern, a repeated history of illegal arrests without probable cause, conduct unbecoming officers.
Do you think it's frequent that this F5 gets used inappropriately? And what I mean is, and we've got a lot of stuff we're working right now to try to fix the F5 process. My concern is that we'll make some people lose their benefits while a whole bunch of people that get to check the block general or honorable, because law enforcement agencies, sometimes leadership, I know this for a fact, they will say, you know what, you don't fuss about it, you just leave, don't make us fire you, and I'll give you a clean F5. That's probably some of the most common terminology that you hear in that environment. And so taking away benefits punishes a portion of the people that would actually deserve punishment. I don't think it's equal punishment, and I don't think it's fair across the board, because how many people are out there right now that got passed and should have had a bad F5? That's a serious concern of mine.
Yes, sir, absolutely, and that is absolutely why we are all here today. One thing that I would point out is the F5 and the information that's contained in the F5 is only as good as what is reported in the F5. So if you have a head of an agency who is looking to pass the trash to avoid the potential of a lawsuit, avoid hearings and administrative pushback from a officer reporting and contesting his F5 status. I think this bill addresses it because it mandates reporting, honest reporting by the heads of the agency. But not only does it do that, but it also offers the head of the agency immunity, civil immunity, for making an accurate report. And I think that's going to help a ton. Not only were we helping to remove the bad officers, but we're helping to insulate the good officers and the good heads of the agency who would report honestly if they had the shield of civil immunity to do so.
So I hear lots of stories. I talk to a lot of different law enforcement agencies, and I'm not going to talk cities, of people getting put on Brady lists that just plain don't belong on the Brady list. They literally, they're wrongfully put on that list. You're probably going to hear some people testify later, I'm guessing. But really, to be honest, that's the least of my worries with this. My biggest concern is these F5s aren't done right. And so we're going to have people that don't get their benefits, and then we're going to have people that do get their benefits because the F5 wasn't done properly. And I just don't think it's fair and equal across the board the way it sits right now. So those are pretty serious concerns of mine.
Yes, sir, and we hope that this bill helps to address some of those concerns. And yes, sir, as Representative King pointed out, there's always room to sit down and talk about this because there is no one here that is against good cops, and that is not my intention at all. I come from a long line of a family that comes from law enforcement. I wouldn't be in my job today if it weren't for that background. And absolutely, we support the good ones, but we cannot have what happened in my county happen anymore.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Members, are there any further questions for the witness? Have you completed your testimony? I know you were answering quite a few questions for Representative Tinderholt, and I just want to make sure that you did share everything you came to share today.
I appreciate that, ma'am. I would like to emphasize that accurate reporting is necessary so these officers don't get passed from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And I think that's one thing that this bill does is address that concern with some civil protections for heads of agencies that accurately report what is going on. Because, and even as far as the F5 reports and information from other agencies, well, I've personally run into a situation where because the personnel files weren't documented accurately, actually documented at all, these officers were passed with honorable discharges and no way to discover from their personnel files what they did wrong, even though it's well known to the public at large. Again, I think this bill can help address that.
Thank you so much for that. And I think we have a question.
Yeah.
The chair recognizes Representative Harless.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So is there any recourse for an officer who's put on the list improperly?
As far as the F5 goes, there's an administrative procedure where they can contest that. But as far as being on the Brady list, no, sir, not at this point. That could be something that could be addressed, and I think probably should be, because I would agree that it's important for honesty in my profession just as much or more so as it is for the law enforcement officers.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, members? Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you much.
Thank you
so
for
much
coming.
for your time.
Sure. Thank you. I would like to share that we do have a resource witness, Cullen Grissom from T-Cole, if so think about if we'd like to call him up. But right now, the chair calls John Wilkerson, Texas Municipal Police Association. And will you please?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
State your
My name is
name.
John Wilkerson. I'm with the Texas Municipal Police Association, and we are here today testifying against this bill.
Thank you.
So TMPA represents over 30,000 police officers across the state of Texas. You're probably going to be hard-pressed to find a single county in the state of Texas that does not have a TMPA member within that. Part of what we do is provide legal representation to law enforcement officers who are facing administrative actions, such as a lot of the actions that tend to result in F5s being issued, and then, of course, the infamous Brady list. There's been several situations across the state where prosecutors at a minimum have developed an improper opinion on their officers, and their careers were negatively affected. I'm more than willing to share one particular story with you if you're so inclined. But the issue that we're having with this bill is that an officer has a distinguished career for decades, could be stripped of their pension, they could be terminated from law enforcement and left to start over in life simply because a prosecutor has an unfavorable opinion of them. And I'd like to direct your attention to this particular bill. Not only does it state that if the officer receives a letter from a prosecutor, but that if the officer engaged in conduct that might get a letter from a prosecutor. And so, you know, I assure the committee, I assure the author of the bill, I assure the entire legislature and everybody in the great state of Texas, it's been said time and time again, nobody despises and wants to get rid of a bad cop worse than us good cops. I'm still an active cop out there working right now, and I despise the bad ones that are out there. This bill is not the way to do that. Instead, what this bill is going to do is inadvertently subject law enforcement back to the cronyism and political influence that TMPA was founded in 1950 to fight against. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative Tinderholt.
Thank you very much again, ma'am. So, have you seen personal instances of when officers were put on the Brady list and they just plain should have never been put on that list?
Yes, sir. Excellent question, Representative Tinderholt. I can think of two specific situations in the recent year. One of those revolved around the election process for a district attorney. Our officer was off duty, out of uniform, and was at an event and spoke against one of the candidates running for DA. That particular candidate won the seat and subsequently issued a Brady letter against the officer for something that the officer said at a political event.
So before you go any further, I hadn't asked you these questions before we know each other, but that makes me pretty angry. Talk about the Brady list and what it does to an officer. Just what happens to an officer when they go home and they got to tell their wife they're on this list? What happens with their peers when they're on this list? Just be honest. What happens to this officer when they're on that list? Because we're talking about just putting someone on a list, and it doesn't mean much to the people here that you're on a piece of paper somewhere. What does it mean?
It'd be the equivalent of somebody erecting a billboard in your district that has a big picture of you on it and says that you're a liar. That would be the equivalent of what being on a Brady list would do.
So if you're a police officer and you're going to do the job and you pull someone over and you get probable cause and then you find a ton of, whatever drug, cocaine in their car, what's the likelihood that person's going to be able to now go testify and keep that person off the streets?
If they're on a Brady list, zero. If the prosecutors issued that Brady list, then they cannot go testify, which then leads to the chief administrator of that law enforcement agency telling that officer, "You can't testify. I cannot have you work in the streets."
Give me another instance.
Give you one specific situation, young deputy in kind of northeast central Texas. That particular deputy was brand new in law enforcement. That deputy went through field training. While he was going through field training, his field training officer advised him, look, we don't have 24-hour coverage in this county, so if you get called out, our policy is you put an hour of overtime. Deputy got called out. He did what he was trained to do. He did what was in policy, in verbal policy at the time. After that, in that same pay period, the sheriff lost his election. A new sheriff came in. The new sheriff came in, questioned the deputy about it. The deputy was forthcoming, said, yes, this is the way I was trained. The sheriff went to the training officer and said, did you train this deputy this way? The training officer said, yes, sir, I sure did. This has been our policy for years. The new sheriff came in, understood the situation, and just issued a reprimand to the deputy saying, do not do this. This could be equivalent in my eyes, in my opinion, as you stealing time. The new DA that was elected at the same time came in, pulled that officer's file, issued a Brady letter. That young man was terminated from his job 2 years ago, and he is out of law enforcement. He cannot find another job in law enforcement.
Let me ask you this. Could he have had a really bad discharge because of that, when that went down? I don't know. I'm asking the question. Could he have been general or dishonorably discharged because of that, because he was on the Brady list, if you had a certain kind of leadership? I don't know.
I don't believe that it would have held. If that sheriff would have given him a dishonorable discharge, I don't remember if the sheriff.
But no, what I'm saying is, could he? Could someone get a dishonorable discharge from that, from a leadership team, from any department, anywhere in the state?
Absolutely.
So then they would lose their pension too for being on a Brady list that's arbitrary. Not all the time. I want to be clear. Not all cities and counties do it that way, but from someone that's arbitrary with no standards for getting put on the Brady list. So it's interesting, this line of questioning, because really we roll it in both ways. Someone could arbitrarily put on that list for something that simple and then get a dishonorable discharge and then lose their pension. Possibly. Not probable, but possible.
Yes, sir. And something I'd like to add to that is I understand the prosecutor testifying before me was talking about if a prosecutor does something illegal and puts somebody on that list on baseless information, then they can be held accountable and then they can be removed out of office by their voters. The problem is you only have a 30-day window to file the appeal on that F5. So if it's not found out till years down the road that prosecutor did something wrong, even if it's something criminal, there's no recourse for that officer to go back to TCOL and get that F5.
Let me ask my last question. And I'm asking you a question you already answered, but I want people to hear this. Including yourself, how many cops do you know that want to work with bad cops?
0.
All right.
Thank you very much, and thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. And any other questions, members? Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your testimony.
They claim 0 cops want to work with bad cops. Yet the Texas Municipal Police Association was at Leon Valley City Council defending fired Police Chief Joe Savaggio. And they also explained how cops are trained to lie. Yes, the union's defending the Blue Lion for their immoral and illegal conduct, all because the corrupt government club told them to do it. It's stealing from the county, and everyone should know that that is wrong.
Public testimony is now closed, and the chair recognizes Chairman King to close on the House Bill 4286.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members, and it was a good discussion, a lot of good questions, and certainly some questions that I've pondered myself, and I certainly appreciate the engagement of Representative Tinderholt, and he knows seems to know a lot about this kind of thing. I will say, it's my information that an officer can be recovered from the Brady list, and if the allegations are unfounded, the person that put him on there doesn't get this civil immunity. I mean, that's what the bill calls for. The Brady list sounds to me like Representative Tinderholt that it could use an overhaul, frankly. I mean, irregardless of what my bill does. The only other thing I would say is I think it was as I stated earlier, the ones that testified against it and the ones that are primarily are going to speak up about it, the number one concern is the pension, and how does it affect each city differently? And I am certainly sympathetic to that. I stated earlier, and I think it was confirmed by everybody that testified, nobody likes these bad cops. It makes them all look bad. And honestly, what's a lot of you on this dais, I don't think, have had my experience. These cops leave these bigger departments and they leave with their certificate intact. And maybe the chief or the sheriff or whoever at the old department just frankly didn't want to do the paperwork. So they say, hey, why don't you just go ahead and resign? And they leave with that law enforcement certificate. So they go to the next town and they go, hey, I want this job. And they say, you got a good certificate? Oh, yeah. Where'd you come from? So the background check is called the old chief, called the sheriff, and they're not going to tell you they didn't do their job. They say, oh, yeah, he's a good old boy. Why don't you take him on? Got him out of their hair now, right? Now they're not going to get in trouble for not doing their due diligence and their paperwork. And that is exactly, I mean, that's the crux of the bill. And I get the Brady list, and I get the pension piece, and I get a lot of these other things. But I have a problem. And I asked this committee to work with me, and I'm certainly willing to work with everybody that testified and every stakeholder in the room that wants to talk about this. I think the bill is good at its core, and I think together we can make it better. One last thing I did hear that they said being on the Brady list was something like getting your a billboard put up in your district and somebody calling you a liar, well, that happens to me about every 2 years. So I certainly understand that, and it's not right. And if somebody is putting people on a list or ruining their lives and it's arbitrary, that system certainly needs to be fixed. But what this bill seeks to do is stop the gypsy cops. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will close.
Thank you so much, and members remember, yeah, that we have passed some pieces of legislation. It's working its way through the legislative process where it's mandated now that the prospective hiring agency is going to look at the records. They're going to have to look at the records. Now, that doesn't mean they don't hire the officer, but it does mean that hiring official, that chief, that sheriff, they've got to look at the records. And now they will be held accountable if something pops up and it was in that record and they just did what you did, just hired the good old boy and just move on. So we've got a lot of stuff moving along. Thank you. And the chair recognizes Representative Tinderholt.
Thank you. I know I've spoken a lot on this bill. You weren't here, but I spoke a lot. Mm-hmm. So like the chairman said, we're moving a lot of bills. Sunset for T-Cole, it's really honestly fixing a lot of the shortfalls, and it's going to force a lot of fixes. I don't know if this is even possible, but since we have all those other fixes, what might be really neat with this bill is to do what you just said. Since we're already doing this other stuff, I don't know if it's possible to turn that bill in and fix the Brady list stuff. I don't know if there's a way to fix that Brady list. It's broken the way that it's done. Just something to think about, because we are moving bills that are going to fix all this other stuff. So I just want you to think about it. I know no one wants to change that.
And Representative, I'm willing to look at whatever fixes the overall problem. I think everything we've discussed tonight is a symptom of the infection. It's all in concert together. So the Brady list is certainly part of it. And in reference to Sunset, I've had a lot of conversations with the Sunset chairman about this bill and about what it does. And there's some things in the Sunset process that you're right are moving towards a solution for me and my constituents.
This might it's your bill, so it would be a great opportunity, since we're fixing most of the other stuff, for that bill to actually turn it into fixing the Brady problem. Because then we would have even a more robust overall fix. Just it's an observation.
If there's something that can be done within this legislation that doesn't overtly gut my bill, I'm more than willing to put it in there. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman King. If there is no objection, House Bill 4286 will be left pending. Is there objection? The chair hears none. 4286 is left pending.
Don't get too caught up in the legislation. Real activism on the ground locally is what will fix the policing problem in Texas. But I wanted you to hear the BS straight from the government club, the Blue Lion, and their unions. Always record the police. Don't let them get away with lying about you.